Hi everyone. So I thought I'd continue my type and relationship series by talking about the ISFP. So, first of all, what should the ISFP be looking for in a long term romantic partner? Well, it's one thing I should say is that it's often quite easy for an ISFP to end up in a suboptimal relationship, often because of their desire to keep things quite harmonious, to keep the relationship feeling good in the short term, and thereby setting themselves up for an absence of growth and development in the longer term. They are very much about keeping the peace in the local sphere. So that's often a danger when it comes to actually finding the best sorts of relationships and deciding that they actually are deserving of more than what is actually being given. So, how do you get an ISFP to find those ideal relationships? They need good criteria in terms of what they're looking for. And what are those criteria? Well, it's important to think about what does an ISFP really need? Not necessarily what they do themselves, but what do they need? Because ISFPs, as I said, what they do is they harmonise the social environment. They keep things pleasant. They keep things nice. They can't abide things not being nice, etc. So, what do they need? They need something that creates freshness and newness, something that creates novelty and a sense of alternative possibilities in their otherwise quite comfortable but often sometimes quite overly stable and even stagnant experiences. And the ISFP is looking for that newness, that freshness, the new water entering into the pond, as it were. And that's what they should be able to get from a romantic partner. So, what should they be looking for, therefore? ISFPs should be looking for someone who is interesting, right? Not someone who's, regular, stable, lets them feel, that everything is, safe and okay. They do need safety. They need to feel safe, absolutely. But they need someone who also provides that interesting element, who brings something they haven't experienced before. If an ISFP finds themselves talking about something that they've never talked about before with someone, and they're engaged and they're interested in it, that is a very, very good sign for a longer term romantic partner. And that's what the ISFP needs. Now, the key thing is in the interestingness, there are some types which also bring a certain lack of safety. And an ISFP is simply not going to put up with that. If they're not feeling psychologically safe with someone, they're not going to continue that relationship, at least one would hope. So, yeah, what an ISFP needs to find is someone who they do feel safe with, they don't feel under pressure with, but who's also bringing interesting and new, exciting things. Um, they also can benefit from someone who can better and more quickly and more fluidly explain the new phenomena around them. Because on the one hand, the ISFP lacks the sort of the new freshness of experiences because they don't often easily go outside of their comfort zone. But at the same time, they find themselves often confused by new phenomena in terms of how to make sense of it. They have a rather stiff capacity for that. They tend to file things in their head based on their own familiar experiences, which again makes them even more tentative to try new things, even though they do want to experience new experiences. So, someone who can bring things into a certain intellectual clarity, who can explain what it is, how it works, etc., an ISFP is going to greatly appreciate. It's going to help them to understand what they're grappling with so that they can actually start to grapple with it and actually get used to it. So, yeah, those are key things. And a key part within that is a certain amount of patience. An ISFP needs someone who, on the one hand, is introducing something to them, but again, is not introducing it with a certain pressure of you have to do this, right? It is coming from a place of curiosity, not from a place of expectation to improve and optimize continuously, which is just going to exhaust the ISFP and not make them feel safe. At the end of the day, everything needs to be on the ISFP's terms in terms of when they're introduced to something and how quickly it is. Pace must be set by an ISFP. So someone who adapts to their pace is also very important. Hence why curiosity, enthusiasm is good rather than expectation, which the ISFP will not tolerate, will not want in their environment. So those qualities I think are most important for an ISFP. Yeah, and there's also a certain tendency here for an ISFP to, yeah, they need someone who, yeah, does not bring that pressure first and foremost, who enables them to feel safe in bringing that interesting and new quality. All right, so that's what an ISFP could most benefit from looking for in someone else: the ability to bring new interesting things, to explain and make sense of it, whilst also not creating a certain urgency and expectation that removes a psychological safety and harmony. What is it that an ISFP can do that can then keep the relationship working better in the longer term? Now, ISFPs, as I said, are very good at maintaining relationships. The problem is not usually that they'll break the relationship if they're not careful. But what are the things that they can do to help keep someone who's that different to them around as well? So the key thing here is that ISFPs, they are very harmonizing when they are less familiar with a situation, when there's a certain urgency that they need to essentially clear away. They need to make things more easy to interact with. When they're very comfortable, ISFPs can actually get a bit more commanding, a bit more pushy even. Because again, things need to always be on their terms. If they are uncomfortable with something, and they are comfortable with the person but not with the situation, then they can actually get quite pushy in order to actually bring things back to what they're comfortable with, which can make them come across even sometimes a little bit bossy in that respect. Again, it's very important that they're comfortable with the person, otherwise you won't see that bossiness come out at all, because then they won't feel comfortable with the person, and so they'll need to sort of keep things easygoing and keep things very, very pleasant. So really, when we're talking about ISFP here, we're talking about them in two different modes. One mode where they're not quite comfortable, and so they're being almost overly self-effacing, overly about, oh, I need to make sure everyone else is happy around me and I don't think about myself enough. And then when the ISFP is actually very comfortable with people they're with, at which point it's more about they are so about their own comfort that they're not actually making room for other things to happen which actually need to be happening and which would actually benefit them, make them more happy at the end of the day. So let's talk about the first side, that almost dependent personality disorder leaning tendency which ISFPs can have. Key thing there really is that is thinking that if you set certain boundaries and you set them earlier, you'll actually prevent a lot more stress later on with people. If an ISFP is very clear about that off the bat, people are more inclined to respect that, and then you would end up in a situation where you're constantly falling over yourself or feeling that your privacy or your personal boundaries are being violated, and you'll be more able to defend that. So it's important to set boundaries early on, even if it's not entirely comfortable in the present moment. It doesn't then get someone into a position of thinking that that sort of thing is okay. And this is what an ISFP can do. They can often be almost a bit too inviting, a bit too friendly, and then suddenly find themselves feeling actually quite uncomfortable in that situation. And then suddenly there's an explosion where there didn't need to be an explosion. If they just said up front they're not okay with these sorts of things, then there wouldn't have been that issue in the first place. And you can get situations where ISFPs can sort of feel the problem, turn it over inside, not actually voice it enough, and as a result they feel more and more uncomfortable with someone when actually they would be a lot more comfortable with them if they just communicated more clearly to begin with. So that's one thing which an ISFP, certainly in that more sort of needing to keep the peace mode, can do to prevent it becoming too uncomfortable, which then leads to that explosion. The explosion being when their ignoring function, extroverted sensation, is released when their leading function, introverted sensation, is so under pressure that they actually need extroverted sensation to restore the balance and the calm. They need some aggression. So yeah, that's how you avoid that little explosion with an ISFP. But the other side, when the ISFP is very, very comfortable in a particular relationship, they're comfortable with the person, but then they can start getting a bit stubborn. They can start getting a bit, computer says no-ish about things. Part of this is also when ISFPs are confident in themselves. They start to form their own rationalizations for things, and those based on their introverted thinking becoming stronger. But then it can also become a bit unsufferable, where they can't quite think outside of their boxes. And it's not that ISFP wants to do this. They don't want to be closed off. They don't like to see themselves as closed off, but they can get into that mindset sometimes when they're confronted with something new. They have a certain understanding of how it ought to be, and it doesn't compute with that, and it's confusing. So they might sort of double down based on what they think is right, when actually they need to have their minds opened a bit more. So what can an ISFP do here? It's important to keep in mind, especially when ISFP is with, say, an ENTP, that it's almost the role of the ISFP to, as it were, control and check some of the more wild ideas that the ENTP is coming up with. So the ISFP ought to say no to things. They ought to consult how they feel about it, how comfortable they are. Is it something which actually they're okay with? Is it something which actually I think is going to be too disruptive? And they should, in the environment of safety, be able to say, no, I'm not so sure about this. I don't think that's a very good idea. I think that would actually be quite uncomfortable. I don't think people would like that, etc., etc., etc. Now, the key thing the ISFP needs to do here is to show their reasoning and make that reasoning something which can be talked about. It's about open communication of reasons. Why do they feel that that particular thing is not something they're comfortable with? What are the reasons? What are the assumptions they have? Because what an ENTP can do is they can play with these assumptions. They can show them in different contexts and see it from different angles. And they do it in a way which doesn't make the ISFP feel stupid, which is very important. ISFPs, more than anything else in the world, fear being made to look stupid. So it's a great source of discomfort for them, where they have their ideas put on under the microscope and sort of and attacked in a judging way, which reflects on their own capabilities to think. So an ENTP doesn't do it in that way. They do it in a far more sort of open, exploratory way. And so really what an ISFP needs to do is to give and show those reasons first. Build the safety so that they can actually say why they're not comfortable with something, and enable more of a negotiation with their partner so that they can actually have their mind opened. It's not always going to work, but at the same time, when it doesn't work, it's because the problem is that the idea is a bad idea, and they would have shown their reason, which actually convinces the other person, actually, that's not a good idea. That's not something we should be going into. It's going to make people very uncomfortable, and we should put that to one side. And in which case, actually, that is its own way of working. So really, simply being clearer in one's reasons for why one thinks what one thinks can really help to make the relationship work better. It prevents the ISFP from coming across as irrationally stubborn, which is the problem, which can be the problem. And it allows the ISFP to then engage with the reasons which are actually holding them back from embracing a particular idea, enabling them to be exposed to new ideas and possibilities which enrich and open up their lives more, which is actually what they want at the end of the day. They just need to be comfortable enough to step out into the unknown and have someone guide them through the unknown. So having those reasons discussed and gone through, the assumptions talked about in a very sort of open and non-judgmental way is what will help the ISFP. So the ISFP, by communicating their rationality for why they're not comfortable with something yet, can enable that conversation to take place and enable them to continue to expand and continue to grow. So yeah, I hope that was helpful for understanding the needs of an ISFP in a relationship and how they can better maintain their relationships, better prevent the possibility of them being perceived as being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. That's not what it's about. They want the new ideas and possibilities of extroverted intuition. And I hope I've also been able to show you what an ISFP should be looking for in a partner in the first place. All right, I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much.